Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees. Tonight's top story. The Health Secretary says he's leaning towards making vaccinations mandatory for NHS staff in England. Also tonight, in Scotland, vaccine passports become legally enforceable. But a hospitality sector body calls it an unmitigated disaster that should be scrapped. And a proposed coal mine in Cumbria is putting the government in a dilemma. Environmentalists are against it, but local residents welcome it. Health Secretary Sajid Javid says he's leaning towards making vaccines mandatory for all NHS staff in England. Currently, around 100,000 NHS workers are not fully vaccinated. If it comes into force, the new rule is likely to put more pressure on the NHS.
In the NHS, we are thinking of doing the same thing. We've been very clear about this. There was a consultation on this. It's just closed, the public consultation. We've yet to make a final decision. But look,
Are you leaning towards?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards doing it. I've been quite open about that. I've been clear about that in Parliament.
The move would bring the situation for NHS staff in England in line with the requirement for care home workers. Rules coming into force on the 11th of November require all care home staff to be double jabbed. The care sector is likely to face staff shortages because of the new rule. And there's been a lot of talk about introducing more restrictions in England, which are known as Plan B. The restrictions would include mandatory masks, vaccine passes, and advice to work from home. The government says the rules will come into force if data shows the NHS is likely come under unsustainable pressure. Here's NTD's Jen Well with more.
The government has so far said it won't put in place the so-called Plan B, which includes mandatory masks and vaccine passes, whereas Labour has called for greater COVID restrictions. But data doesn't suggest a correlation between recorded cases and mandates. For example, in Wales, where face coverings have been mandatory, the number of people testing positive for COVID-19 has still gone up. Similar concerns brought up in Parliament recently on the Scottish rules.
On his stricture about the masked mandate, the requirement that he wishes us to follow Scotland on, it doesn't seem to have reduced the rate of infection in Scotland, which is somewhat higher than in England. Has it?
I thank the gentleman for his point. I am an enthusiastic mask wearer, and I am enthusiastic for one very simple reason, and I think it does help us all, is that it sends a very strong message to people that the virus has not gone away. And therefore I would encourage people to do so. I think it also has benefits in reducing the transmission.
Questions remain on the point of vaccine passes too, with the Prime Minister saying last week that vaccines aren't effective when it comes to transmission. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
The Scottish vaccine passport scheme is now legally enforceable. But the first weekend under the scheme has seen heavy criticism from a hospitality sector body that called it an unmitigated disaster and calls for it to be scrapped completely. NTD's Malcolm Hudson has the story.
In Scotland, proof of full vaccination is required to enter nightclubs and large events. The first weekend of its enforcement saw a concerning number of reports of abuse to hospitality staff. Continuing problems were also reported with the vaccine passport app. The Scottish Hospitality Group says staff have faced intolerable levels of abuse, and some venues saw a drop in footfall of up to 40%. The group says the vaccine passport scheme is an unmitigated disaster and calls for it to be scrapped altogether. A Scottish government spokeswoman said, COVID-19 certification is a proportionate way of encouraging people to get vaccinated and also of helping large events and nighttime hospitality to keep operating during what will potentially be a very difficult winter. The vaccine passport scheme applies to late-night premises with music, alcohol and dancing between midnight and 5 a.m. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News.
Residents of a town in Cumbria welcomed the news of a proposed new coal mine as it will bring jobs and prosperity. But environmentalists are strongly against it. The government is facing a dilemma between meeting green targets and creating more jobs in the north. We've got more from NTD's Cos Jimenez.
In the patchwork of hills, lakes and sea that makes up England's northwest corner, most people see beauty in Whitehaven. But Dave Craddock sees broken dreams. The coal mine where he once worked has long closed. The chemical factory that employed thousands is gone. The nuclear power plant is being decommissioned. For 74-year-old Craddock, a plan for a new coal mine that could bring hundreds of jobs is cause for hope.
It's given them hope that at least someone's interested in the area. It's as though we were at the forgotten end down here. The mine will provide jobs for people who've got mining in their blood.
But environmentalists view it with horror. They say it sends a disastrous message as the UK welcomes world leaders, advocates, diplomats and scientists to Glasgow for COP26, a United Nations climate conference.
To people who are really aware of how urgent the climate emergency is, it's blindingly obvious that the quickest way to stop these carbon emissions and to make radical changes, which we have to do in the next 10 years, is to stop opening any new coal mines.
The proposed mine would be the first deep coal mine in the UK for 3 decades.
So the UK's got a world-leading climate target. It aims to be net zero emissions by 2050, and it's made great strides in areas like offshore wind and renewables. So this coal mine really stands out as being something that works directly contrary to those climate ambitions.
West Cumbria Mining wants to extract coking coal from under the Irish Sea. The company says it will be the world's first net zero coal mine, with all of its carbon emissions reduced or offset by credits to the Gold Standard Foundation, an environmental organization. The promised well-paid jobs are welcomed by political leaders of the local community.
The coal that will be extracted from this mine is exclusively for the use of making steel. And if we're going to have the green industrial revolution that we need in developing solar, wind, wave, and certainly here we'd love to develop more nuclear, it's all going to take significant amounts of steel.
The local authority approved the mine a year ago, but under pressure from opponents and its own environmental commitments, the government intervened in March and ordered an inquiry by a planning inspector. The inspector visited the site earlier this month and will make a recommendation around the end of the year. Willis is sympathetic to the need for well-paid jobs in former industrial areas and says the government needs to come up with a strategy.
What's desperately needed from government is a clear long-term plan with money and jobs attached so that everyone can see how we're going to achieve this transition to a net zero world.
Nature and industry have long vied for supremacy in this part of England. Whitehaven sits on the edge of the Lake District National Park, an area whose beauty inspired William Wordsworth and Beatrix Potter. But it was long ago an industrial area where people worked at hard, dirty jobs in factories and mines. Cos Jimenez, NTD News.
Ahead of this year's COP26 in Glasgow, we are taking a look at the pros and cons of electricity generated from wind turbines. While some say it provides an efficient and inexpensive way to supply power, others argue that it can have detrimental effects on wildlife and lead to industrialization of the countryside. NTD's Eddie Aiken brings us this report.
Wind power is seen as a sustainable, renewable energy source with a much smaller environmental impact than fossil fuels. But opinions are divided. Onshore wind farms can lead to industrialization of the countryside. Large areas of land are required which can impact the wildlife, and some people don't like to see them. All of this can be solved by placing the wind farms offshore. But they are not without problems either. Offshore wind farms have higher maintenance costs than onshore ones. And there are concerns in the fishing industry that the noise they create harms sea life. Wind farm supporters say the benefits outweigh the negative effects. Wind power is an intermittent energy source that cannot be dispatched on demand. It means it cannot be relied on alone, and other power sources are needed to give a reliable supply. Wind energy generation accounted for 24% of total electricity generation in the UK in 2020, with offshore wind accounting for 13% and onshore wind accounting for 11%. The UK has the largest offshore wind farm in the world, located off the coast of Yorkshire, while around half of the UK's onshore wind activity is in Scotland. Eddie Aiken, NTD News.
Amnesty International says today it will be closing its Hong Kong offices because of the national security law imposed by the Chinese Communist Party. They say the law has made it effectively impossible for rights groups to work freely and without fear of serious reprisals. Hong Kong used to be one of Asia's leading NGO hubs, with groups drawn to its robust rule of law and wide-ranging autonomy guaranteed when control over the former British colony was returned to Beijing in 1997. The national security law has changed all that. Many leading pro-democracy activists and politicians have been jailed or forced into exile. The chair of Amnesty's International Board says the decision to close its 2 Hong Kong offices by the end of the year was made with a heavy heart. And now to France. One of the country's most popular comic series, Asterix and Obelix, has published a new issue. Fans are rushing to get a copy. In the latest adventure, the 2 heroes face new challenges as they find themselves in a land of female warriors. This report comes from NTD's Eddie Aiken.
Asterix and the Griffin, the latest edition of the famous French comic series Asterix and Obelix, went on sale on bookshops last week at the Paris Montparnasse chain of French books retailer Fnac. Mascots dressed as the 2 central characters who stand up to Roman occupiers. The setting for the new series is Sarmatia, a cold region on the far edge of Europe. In that society, the women are the warriors.
Depuis la fille de Vercingétorix, on va dire qu'on est rentré un peu dans une autre ère pour les Gaulois.
We can say we've entered a new era for the Gauls. And of course, we're not in the 60s where women are housekeepers. So Asterix reflects a little of this trend. And you can see that it doesn't work out very well for Asterix, whose warrior side is a bit challenged.
Pas toujours trop bien pour Astérix, quoi, qui est un petit peu remis en cause dans son côté guerrier.
Bookstore Fnac says that the Asterix series represents a significant portion of their comic book sales. Most clients order them online and collect them in-store.
It's an eagerly awaited release, one of the most eagerly awaited of the year. Asterix, 60 years since its first publication, still enthuses our clients, young and old. It's an intergenerational phenomenon.
The Asterix comic series made its debut in 1959. Since then, Asterix has become one of the most loved characters in French popular culture. He lives with his best friend Obelix in a Gaulish village in the Roman Empire, often getting into confrontations with Roman legionnaires.
Parce que ça représente un peu notre pays, le rebelle gaulois.
It represents our country, the rebellious Gaul. There is a comical aspect that I've always liked. This is our culture. It's completely French, always complaining. I like it.
Râleur, voilà, j'aime bien.
The stories have fans all over the world, having been translated into over 100 languages and dialects. More than 30 Asterix comic book albums have been published and nearly 400 million sold. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Still to come, Turkey has threatened to expel 10 ambassadors from allied countries, including Germany, France and the US. It's over a joint statement seeking the release of a prominent jailed philanthropist. That and more after the break. The president of Turkey at the weekend said he'd ordered to expel 10 ambassadors to the country. But Germany and other countries said today they have not received a formal expulsion notice. Turkey's move came after the envoy sought the release of a prominent philanthropist. NTD's Eddie Aiken has the story.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan welcomed statements on Monday by several Western embassies that they abide by a diplomatic convention not to interfere on a host country's internal affairs. The statements were made almost simultaneously on Twitter as Erdogan entered a cabinet meeting to discuss expelling ambassadors from 10 embassies. The Turkish president on Saturday said he'd ordered the envoys to be declared persona non grata.
This is Turkey, glorious Turkey. You can't just get up and come to the foreign ministry and give instructions.
Last week, the envoys from 10 nations, including Germany, France and the US, sought the release of a prominent philanthropist in a joint statement. Osman Kavala has been detained for 4 years on charges of financing protests and involvement in an attempted coup. Rights groups say his case is emblematic of a crackdown on dissidents under Erdogan. Observers see the expelling of diplomats of NATO and other allies as a move that could widen the diplomatic rift between Turkey and the West to its greatest extent in Erdogan's 19 years in power.
Declaring ambassadors of 10 countries at the same time is unprecedented in Turkey's history, and it might as well be unprecedented in world history as well, and will naturally have significant consequences for Turkey.
The diplomatic crisis has added to investor concerns about Turkey's economy after the central bank unexpectedly slashed interest rates by 200 points last week, despite inflation rising to nearly 20%. The lira recovered on Monday after hitting a new all-time low. It has lost almost a quarter of its value so far this year. Germany responded on Monday.
It's clear that the Turkish president's remarks fill us with concern and incomprehension. But as mentioned, there has been no formal notification from the Turkish side.
The French government also said on Monday its ambassador to Turkey has not been formally expelled from Turkey. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
And now to Hungary. Prime Minister Viktor Orban is facing challenges to his power both in his country and from the EU. He is at odds with Europe over media freedoms and rule of law. And observers expect a close election race next year. Here's NTD's El Rose with more.
Thousands of supporters marched in Budapest in a show of unity behind Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban on Saturday. Orban gave a rare public speech.
The whole European Union has attacked us. It also attacked us when we stopped the flow of migrants, when we built the fence and defended our borders. Dozens of prime ministers have attacked Hungary. We're still here. But who can remember even their names?
Orban came to power in 2010, and his Fidesz party has dominated Hungary's parliament with a two-thirds majority ever since. One supporter says Orban has a vision for the future.
I think the opposition is not able to govern. They don't have any concepts. They only have one goal, to oust Viktor Orban, who I think is Europe's best politician.
Hungary is expected to face a close parliamentary election next year. For the first time, a united front of opposition parties is challenging Orban. Their candidate for Prime Minister made his first appearance during a separate rally organised by the opposition on the same day.
Orban has already confronted with almost every single country in Europe. Orban is really stopping the European Union from stepping up in environmental and human rights issues. So I believe that we will be very good friends with Europe, definitely.
Orban's government, with its main ally Poland, has clashed with Brussels repeatedly. The EU is now considering imposing financial penalties on the country over concerns that Orban has eroded democratic institutions and the rule of law. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
Going to Italy now. Former Interior Minister Matteo Salvini says a trial where he faces charges of kidnapping for not allowing a migrant ship to dock in Italy is not serious. Witnesses at the trial include Hollywood actor Richard Gere. Salvini says protecting the country's border is his duty, but he could face up to 15 years in prison if found guilty. Edward Baran reports.
Matteo Salvini, leader of Italy's right-wing League Party, said a trial where he faces kidnapping charges for refusing to let a migrant ship dock in the country in 2019 was not serious, as actor Richard Gere was admitted to testify. Salvini, who was Italy's interior minister at that time, appeared on Saturday at the second hearing of a trial in the Sicilian capital of Palermo, where the court approved a list of witnesses. Witnesses include Italy's former Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte and Hollywood actor Richard Gere. Gere was in Italy at the time and joined the Spanish NGO Proactiva Open Arms, which managed the rescue ship, to deliver food to people on board. Salvini told reporters, "Now you tell me how serious is a trial where Richard Gere comes from Hollywood to testify on how bad I am." Proactiva Open Arms told the court Gere could give a direct account of the conditions on board the vessel, which was stranded off the Italian island of Lampedusa for 19 days before prosecutors ordered the evacuation of the people on board. It's not clear whether Gere will appear in person to give evidence at the trial. Salvini, who's built much of his political fortune on an anti-immigration campaign, said he simply did his duty as a minister, adding that defending a country's borders is not just a minister's duty but everyone's duty. Salvini could face up to 15 years in prison if found guilty at the end of a long 3-stage judicial process.
In other news, the European cruise industry is bouncing back after the pandemic. And while some things are different, particularly the protocols for dealing with COVID outbreaks, the industry hopes to quickly return to 2019 levels. And it is well on the way to doing so. NTD's Joy Duguid brings us the story.
Cruise ships are visiting Spain once again, bringing tourists from the UK, mainland Europe and the US. But the pandemic has dramatically changed the industry. These ships are not packed with holiday makers like they used to be. The capacity for those docking in Spain is limited to 75%. And there are strict protocols in case of a COVID-19 outbreak.
The passengers on board who have positive antigen tests in the middle of the cruise will be isolated in an individual cabin, on a deck alone, and exclusively dedicated to passengers who test positive. All passengers on board wear a bracelet that allows us to geolocate all contacts who have been within 2 meters of that passenger who has tested positive.
Despite the new restrictions, the industry is well on the way to getting shipshape. MSC already has 19 cruisers running, more than half of its fleet. They have also opened new routes to Brazil and South Africa.
The market has shown us that the pandemic will not end the desire to travel on board a ship. 2021 turnover has been similar to what we sold in 2019.
The Association of Cruise Companies, CLIA, says Europe led the way in getting back on board after the pandemic. By June this year, 3/4 of Europe's cruise ships were operating again, and that keeps rising.
This year, almost 80% of the cruise activity will be recovered, and we hope that in 2022 we will recover 100%. I think it is a fairly realistic forecast, and above all, quite an optimistic future.
CLIA says almost 30 million people took a cruise in 2019, creating 1 million jobs and an economic impact of £112 billion. The industry hopes to get back to full steam very soon. Joy Duguid, NTD News.
And now to Spain. Madrid rang to the sound of sheep bells yesterday as shepherds guided their flocks through the heart of the capital. Locals lined the route to welcome the traditional spectacle, which allows shepherds to use ancient migration routes from northern Spain to the south for winter grazing.
Out of the paddock and into the city. The streets of Madrid were filled with sheep on Sunday as shepherds guided their flocks through the heart of the Spanish capital, following ancient seasonal herding routes.
I didn't realize that we were going to be so close to them. I thought there would be maybe more space, but I've seen people touch them, I've seen people pet them. I didn't realize that we were going to be right here.
The annual event, which started in 1994, allows shepherds to exercise their right to use traditional routes to herd their livestock from northern Spain to more southerly pastures for winter grazing. Shepherd Miguel Gonzalez has worked almost his entire life with the animals and said he was proud to support the traditional migration. We are reclaiming the royal cattle routes that are old paths that were used to take cattle across Spain, he said, clad in traditional dress. The route would have taken them through the quiet countryside a few centuries ago, but today sees them traverse through the bustling city.
And finally, about 100 wearers of moustaches and beards in all shapes and sizes took part in the Beard Olympics and the German Beard Championships in the Bavarian town of Agen am See last weekend. And the winner in the category Moustache Imperial is...
Ich trage jetzt meinen Bart seit mittlerweile 7 Jahre.
I've been wearing my moustache for 7 years now. I've taken part in several championships, and now, for the first time, I've managed to win first place in the German championship.
Der erste Platz in der Süddeutsche gekriegt und sonst war ich immer Vizemeister und das macht mich sehr glücklich heute.
Other categories include Moustache Dali, Whiskers Freestyle, and Forebeard Natural with styled upper lip. One jury member explains they look at how the beard or moustache is groomed, how it's grown, whether it's shaved out, whether it's clean, and whether it's shiny. Participants from all countries can join the Beard Olympics, while the German Beard Championships is only for German citizens who are members of a German beard club. The future president of the East Bavarian Beard and Moustache Club explains, apart from a good hair growth, it's all about shaping and grooming. His secret for hold and shape is simple: hairspray and a hairdryer. That's the news for today. Have a good evening. Thank you for watching our daily news show on YouTube. You can also watch our other programming on channel 190 on Sky TV or on Freeview via channel box on channel 271. In the meantime though, please give this video a like and hit subscribe to our channel. Have a good day.